Okay, this video is about how we understand the world by putting everything into separate boxes, each with their own specific labels. We can only understand the world through mechanical and conceptual systems. We have created a model of understanding that is completely based on hardcore logic slash science and mathematics, and all they have in common is that they are structuring reality by separating everything into boxes. Now, the first thing you have to do to understand anything is to create a conceptual model filled with concepts that represent very specific things in reality. It all starts with creating a symbolic language that we associate with things that we perceive or that we experience. If we are going to make a logical statement, that statement has to include concepts that represent something in reality. For example, here is a statement: all men are mortal. This is a statement that includes a few concepts. It includes the concept men and the concept mortal. Now, do we perfectly understand what those concepts mean? In order to make sure that everybody who reads this statement or who hears this statement will interpret this statement in the exact same way, we have to create universal definitions for these concepts. In other words, any concept needs to be defined very precisely. Otherwise, we might end up with different meanings of the concept. But how precise can we define them? Can we define them infinitely precise? No. Also notice that every explained concept is explained with just more concepts. This is the typical example of circular reasoning. If you look up a word in a dictionary, that word will be explained with just more words, and if you look up all those new words individually, they will be explained with just, again, more words, and if you look up those new words again, you might eventually arrive back at the original word that you started with. Now, the thing with strict logic or strict mathematics is that it has to draw very precise boundaries between two things. There needs to be a very precise boundary between two different concepts. So I am literally talking about a boundary line that perfectly distinguishes two things from each other, as if these two things are living in two separate universes. So if you create a concept, you need to describe perfectly what it represents and where that representation begins and ends. For example, the color red can be subdivided into multiple shades of red. But where exactly do you draw the boundary between the color red and the color orange? The lighter the color red becomes, the more it will start to look like orange or pink. Now, I don't know exactly, but where precisely does the color red officially stop being red? And where precisely can you officially conceptualize it as pink? This may seem stupid, but it is absolutely necessary for our logical understanding, because we really have to create concepts that can make clear distinctions between two things. You have to set up definite boundaries, otherwise the concept can't be created. So this is really the first big argument that I want to make. Our entire model of logical understanding is basically forced to separate reality into distinguishable boxes, and each box has their unique feature or characteristics and rules, and they have their own definition. And in this way we are able to structure reality in a way that is comprehensible for us. If we all know where red begins and ends and where pink begins and ends, then there won't be any problems when we talk about it. We literally put everything into boxes. For the sake of being able to communicate conceptual language and to be able to debate with each other, we have to draw boundaries and create a box, even though we don't really know if actual boundaries exist in reality. So we put the different shades of red into the box that we label red. We put all the different types of trees into the box that we label tree. Now these are very generalized labels. So what we do is we create a hierarchy of boxes with at the top a very general abstract, a very abstract label such as tree. And then we start to make subdivisions with more subtle and subtle distinctions. But they remain very clear distinctions. And sometimes it's difficult to decide in which box to put a thing into because it may contain features that corresponds with multiple boxes. And that's the thing that we really don't like. A thing has to be put into one specific box. It can't be put into multiple boxes simultaneously. No, a willow tree is a willow tree and not an oak tree at the same time. So for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of being able to argue at all, we put stuff into distinguishable boxes with solid boundaries. Even though we don't really know where the boundaries are located in reality. And the big mistake that we make is we treat these boxes as the substrate of reality. We pretend as if these boxes actually are located at the ground level of reality with solid boundaries. We use them as if they are the ultimate building blocks of reality. For example, we use electrons and photons as the substrate of reality, and then from this platform we start to apply these concepts to our logical thinking. But what are electrons? What are photons? We are able to question everything, but for the sake of simplicity and being able to think about something at all, we have to make the decision to stop questioning the electron, for example, and to use it as a basic platform from which we finally can start to create models. You see, we are pragmatic, we are practical. If we keep on questioning literally everything, we will be lost forever, and there will never be a ground level or a basic platform that we can stand on, and so we can do anything. So for the sake of getting stuck in an infinite loop of questioning, we decide to start somewhere and to use that as our ground level, even though we don't really know what the hell that is. Yet we take it for granted, and we don't dare to question it further because we will be lost in a meaningless loop of questioning, and there will be nothing to understand. This is the biggest fear of logic, of science, of mathematics. In order to create a model of understanding, science first needs to take for granted a certain layer of reality that it can't fundamentally explain. So anyway, back to the boundaries. We have to put everything into boxes with boundaries to give it a solid meaning, even though we can't find a clear boundary in reality. And the question is whether or not there exists an actual boundary in reality. Does there exist an infinitely solid boundary line between the color red and the color pink, so that they are fundamentally separated from each other? Because in our models of understanding, we literally treat everything as if they are fundamentally separated by a solid boundary. Now, why do we put multiple things into the same box? Well, because these things share the same features and characteristics. In other words, they are similar. But as we make more and more subdivisions, or as we make more specific boxes for very specific things, it becomes harder to find similarities. Here is an example. We can put every single banana on Earth into one big box that we label banana. So that box will contain millions and millions of bananas. And then within this huge box, we put smaller boxes for different types of bananas. So each type will have their own box, such as big bananas and small bananas. And then again, we put smaller boxes into the box of big bananas, for example, such as ripe and unripe bananas. And then again, we put smaller boxes into the box of unripe bananas, such as bananas that contain more than 15% of vitamin C and bananas that contain less than 15% of vitamin C. And again, we put smaller boxes into the box of bananas that contain more than 15% of vitamin C, such as the bananas which are sold at supermarkets and the bananas that are sold in local markets. And again, we put smaller boxes into the box of the bananas that are sold in local markets, such as the bananas which are sold by a man and the bananas which are sold by a woman. And again, we put smaller boxes into the box of bananas which are sold by a woman, such as the bananas which are sold by a woman with pink hair. And again, what about the bananas which are sold by a Swedish woman with pink hair and who lives in a caravan? What about the bananas which are sold by an old Swedish woman with pink hair who lives in a black caravan with no windows and who owns 5 nude cats with no name? So how many old Swedish women do there exist with pink hair who are living in a black caravan with no windows and who owns 5 nude cats with no name and who are selling bananas with at least 15% vitamin C at local markets? Well, not too many. She's probably the only person in the world who is selling those bananas. So the point is that the more we go into specific details, the less we can put into that box. We started with millions and millions of bananas within the biggest box, and gradually, as we added more smaller and specific boxes, the amount of bananas that we could put into these boxes became smaller and smaller. And eventually, if we keep adding more and more details to the label that we put on that box, we will only be able to put just one item into that box. In other words, we have created a concept or a label which can only be applied to one thing. Now imagine a concept that can literally only be applied to one single thing. Now there is a problem here. You must be able to put at least 2 things into one box. Because in order to understand anything, you have to be able to compare 2 things with each other. We have to be able to see the similarities between 2 things. If we have only one concept that we can apply to one thing, then notice that this thing is the only thing in the universe that exists like this. For example, take a look at your hand. Just look at your hand and notice that your hand is the only hand in the entire universe that exists in this particular way. The way your hand is located in space, the way your hand is arranged by the trillions and trillions of cells and atoms, the way your hand is attached to your body, the way your hand smells, the way your hand is controlled by your brain and by your thoughts. There literally exists only one hand like that in the entirety of the universe. And it belongs to you. Congratulations, your hand is absolutely unique. Notice that every single thing in the universe is absolutely unique, when we go into infinite detail. Literally every atom, every particle, every point in space is absolutely unique. And also every point in time. Your hand, in its totality, with all its details, is literally the only hand in the entirety of existence that exists. And there is nothing else which exists identical to your hand. So there is nothing perfectly similar that you can compare your hand with. And if there is nothing to compare it with, how are you going to understand it? We understand the concept hand because from within the box that we label hand, there are billions of hands which look similar. They look similar because we are filtering out all the details. And from this level, every hand looks the same. And it's through these similarities that we can understand what a hand is. We are ignoring the details, and of course by doing this, all hands will look a lot more similar. And so of course now we can connect all the hands and put them into one big box that we can understand. So we can only understand things when we filter out all the details, such that we can create an abstract model of those things, a model which connects all those things into a universal concept. But of course, in reality, everything contains an infinite amount of details. So when we look at things with all their details, we can't connect those things because there are no similarities anymore. And so by definition, you can't understand them. If you only have one thing in existence, how is it going to understand itself if it is the only thing that exists? How do we understand the world? Well, with our thoughts, but also your thoughts with their infinite details are absolutely unique. If you take one single thought out of your brain, then this is the one and only thought in existence that exists in that particular way. So you can't compare it with anything else in a perfect way. So now, how can that thought understand itself when it only has itself to understand itself? You can't use other thoughts because those other thoughts are also separate, unique things in existence. And that's not what we want to understand. We want to understand one particular unique thing in existence, but you can't use another particular unique thing in existence to understand that unique thing. You see, it has to use itself to understand itself. But is that possible? No, it turns out that's not possible. Thoughts are designed to understand other things in an abstract way, filtering out all the details. But if you want to understand a thing with all its details, you have to use the thing itself to understand itself. Again, a thing with all its details is absolutely unique in existence, and so in this sense, it is lonely. It's absolutely lonely. There is nothing else that exists identical to it, or identical like it. So it really is the only thing in existence. That's what it means to be unique. So there literally is nothing else that you can use to understand it but itself. And at this point, in order to understand something, you have to use the thing itself to understand it. At this point, everything becomes self-referential. So how can you understand a thing when the only thing you have to understand it is the thing itself? Any attempt to describe that thing is wrong because you are using other things to understand it. Any theory, any explanation, any mathematical model, all of that is wrong. because you are using other things to understand it. Trying to imagine the thing is wrong, because you are using a separate imagination to understand the thing. Remember, you only have the thing itself. You literally have nothing else. So what happens? Well, you become it. You become the thing. The thing is itself, and there is only itself. It just is being itself as itself, whatever that is. To be itself, being itself. That is the only thing that will remain. Being itself. To be. You will become the thing with its endless details. Because if you are separated from it, you will be something else using something else to understand it. So the only way to understand a thing infinitely much is to completely merge into that thing and actually becoming that thing, such that you can't possibly use a separate thing to understand it. Once you become that thing, you will have a direct, intuitive sense of infinite understanding, a form of understanding that you can't possibly describe using other things, such as language or mathematics. And that's it. This is the final stage of understanding. This is the final box, the smallest box. It's impossible to label this box. It's impossible to interpret this box as a separate thing. In this box, you become the box, and the whole notion of a box will be gone. And now you have basically unboxed reality. So in a nutshell, there can never exist a logical model or mathematical model that can perfectly explain reality itself with infinite details, because those models are inherently based on the usage of abstractions. And what is an abstraction? An abstraction is a model that is derived from at least two phenomena. You can only create an abstraction of a tree when you are able to compare two trees with each other. If, on the other hand, there is only one tree in existence, you can't derive an abstract model out of that. Yet, abstract models are the only things we can understand. So, I think my next video will be on abstractions. Yeah, that's a good idea. But for now, I'm done. And I'm saying bye-bye.